Welcome everyone to another In Conversation with myself, Michaela McMichal of World Vision UK. I am part of the churches team, and with Joy Blundell, who is a pastor at Alive Church in Lincoln with her husband, who is also extremely passionate about restoring and transforming communities by mobilising the church. And Joy and I have been having conversations over the last few years about how that is possible in the local church and across the world globally. We have been having a conversation about empowering women, but in the context of a strong world. And we wanted to just share what we've been talking about, share what we've explored together, but also in that we want to be able to empower you and encourage you as church leaders in what you do in your communities for the sake of those near you and far. So today, we are wanting to consider how we can have a stronger world, how in the context of having a stronger world, the whole of humanity needs to be able to flourish. So we are going to be looking at a few things. We're going to share our screen, but before I dive in, Joy, would you like to share anything about who you are, what you're doing right now in your life, just so people who maybe don't know you get a little glimpse of your life?
Yeah, thanks, Michaela. So great to be here with you and to chat. I know we have loads of conversations behind the scenes, but to chat and then be recorded. I'm based in Lincoln. I'm a church leader, and like you said, I mean, you summed it up really well. Really passionate about the church being mobilised to bring transformation, and I think one of the most important things we can do as churches, as leaders, is to really reflect on our own transformation, our own growth, so that we can kind of be the change we want to see. And so yeah, I'm excited to be talking with you today about some of my own personal reflections, a model that's really helped me, and maybe some stories of where we've seen incredible transformation through the work of World Vision.
Amazing, amazing. So we're going to dive in. I'm going to share the screen because we have a bit of a PowerPoint presentation just to put a framework around what we're talking about. So we're going to have that. You'll hopefully still be able to see us, and you'll obviously hear us chat through it. So let's hope technology serves me well. Here we go. Joy, can you see that?
Yay, yeah, all good. Yep.
Everyone else can too. So we want to consider what it means to have a strong world through embracing vulnerability and authority. And I think when I click it, it should move forward. There we go. In that, we want to, I'm just going to move us over here. In that, we want to explore how we navigate the paradox of strength and weakness. We want to consider how Jesus did this, and then we want to think about what happens when we make room for everyone's strengths. So when we're looking at what makes a strong world, and ultimately what we're considering mostly in this conversation today is empowering women, and empowering women to be as strong as they can be and use their strengths in every area of life. We want to highlight that this is not about feminism, that this isn't a feminist issue, that this ultimately is a humanity issue. To be strong, to be a strong world, we have to empower everyone. We cannot diminish anyone. So in uplifting and empowering women, we have to make sure as women and as men, as we do that, we don't diminish men across the world. But unfortunately, within this conversation and within everything that we may consider today, oppression has and still is predominantly experienced by women. And we have to acknowledge this. And we have to acknowledge that unless we as women, but also men across the world, unless they step into this conversation and make room for women to be able to take the equal opportunities that we have in some countries, and unfortunately not in others, unless that room is made possible, things cannot change. So ultimately, we have to help reshape gender roles and stereotypes, because it is not and should never be a fight of the sexes. It should only ever be considered as a fight for humanity and making the world as strong as it can be, where each of us can lean into our own strengths and our own gifts, skills and abilities. So in all of this, despite the great advances we have made in our parts of the world, things still need to improve across other parts of the world where extreme poverty is experienced. Women experience extreme obstacles and oppression in countries that are the most dangerous places where extreme poverty is prevalent. So when we are considering a strong world, we need to think of these women that still have no freedom. We need to think that these girls and women faced obstacles in their homes simply because they're born female. We need to think about these unique obstacles that they face that is holding them back from living prosperous lives. So in all of that, when we can consider the reality for women, we do not want to diminish men at any point, but we need men in this conversation. And we hope that we can hold that as we journey this whole conversation today. So I'm going to throw over to Joy, and we're going to look at how we navigate the paradox of strength and weakness.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. This is a framework that has really helped me to understand some of the vulnerability I've experienced in my own leadership journey, and also the call to authority or strength as a leader to bring transformation to the world. And it's taken from a book called Strong and Weak by Andy Crouch. He's one of my favorite authors. And he talks about not authority and vulnerability being two separate things, but there being a paradox of strength and weakness. And when we lean into both, we display fully the image of God. So let me talk you through it. The first, if you see this 2x2 kind of chart axis with authority and vulnerability as the two different axes. And Andy Crouch defines authority as capacity for meaningful action and vulnerability as capacity for meaningful risk. And he talks about how, as an image bearer of God, made in his image, we are full of authority, full of capacity for meaningful action. And we're also, as humanity on the earth, we are by nature exposed to risk all the time, but at different elements in our journey. So I want to invite you to reflect on how you experience these 4 areas as we go through them. So let's look at the first area. There we go. There are the 2: authority, capacity for meaningful action, and then vulnerability, capacity for meaningful risk. And then on the next slide, we look at high authority. When our authority is really high, lots of power, lots of capacity to make change, but our vulnerability is really low. So not much exposure to risk at all. He says that this leads to exploitation, which is the most seductive and dangerous quadrant, especially for leaders. And we can see this around the world where, say, government or people in authority will hold their authority, but refuse to use that authority or that power to make risks or take risks for the more weak of the population. And it leads to injustice and exploitation. So the next quadrant that we have is low authority. So this is the opposite: low authority, but also low vulnerability. And Andy Crouch says that this leads to safety or withdrawal, or like we just want to hide. And I find this really interesting, reflecting on kind of the way that some of our culture is going in the UK with engagement online. And this is really a place of simulated authority, where we might have video games where we've got like illusory authority, like we've got loads of power to kill people on like Fortnite, but no vulnerability. You're just at home, like in your own kind of bedroom or lounge. Or the same with engaging in like kind of online text or even pornography. High sense of like authority or power, possibly, but very low sense of power and low sense of vulnerability. There's just kind of like safety. And I think this for me feels like the worst of all. It's also a place that maybe I would go when I just don't feel like I want to put myself out there, but I just want to kind of hide after I've preached and I feel like it's maybe gone wrong, and I just want to go into the loos at church and just hide. But it's a place of safety and withdrawal, and it's not a place that image bearers want to be. Then the next one is low vulnerability, but also high vulnerability but low authority. And this is a place of poverty, suffering and oppression, and it comes in all sorts of ways, through loss, through injustice, through death, and every single image bearer faces this quad at certain points in our lives. I've experienced that when I've lost a loved one or when I felt really powerless. We'll hear stories of people who kind of are placed in this for no fault of their own, but maybe children with no running water, they high vulnerability, no clean water, low authority, low capacity to do anything about it. But God has made us all in his image with authority. He's given us authority. We just need to kind of find out how to use it. And he's also called us to take risks or to serve other people. And so the place that all image bearers are called to go to is to this kind of up and to the right, high authority, high vulnerability, which leads to flourishing, is the place we should be moving towards as followers of Jesus, with a leadership call to rule and reign over God's creation, full of understanding of who we are in Christ, our authority in Christ, but a willingness not to hide away, not to live in comfort, but to sacrifice and to expose ourselves to risk for the sake of people who might be living in the other quadrants. And our aim as followers of Jesus is to bring and empower people to come with us into that quadrant. So I don't know if you've maybe had experiences of being in any of these places and what that might feel like as a leader, but I think that this is like summing up some of the human experience. And I'd just love to, Michaela, just to think about where Jesus sits in this. And I think what I've noticed is like more 99.9% of the time that Jesus shows up, he shows up in full of authority and full of vulnerability. And there's only the moment on the cross, although you may argue that he had the power to step off that cross, but he chose to stay there. And so he chose to stand in his authority, but full of vulnerability. But a babe in a manger, coming exposed to the risks of humanity. The incarnation itself is just a theological truth of this framework. But I'd love us to just have a quick look at John 4, which is where Jesus talks to the Samaritan woman. I often find in the Bible, it's really interesting that there's loads of Samaritan women or women with the issue of blood, but I quite like to give them a name or find out what their name is so that we're not just glossing over and calling them a woman. So biblical scholars say that her name is Fontaine, which means luminous one. And the Bible talks in John 4 about Jesus going from Judea to Galilee, but he goes to Samaria. And Samaria, we know, is like a unclean territory, a place that Jewish people were told to avoid. But Jesus walked all the way through this unclean territory, and he sees a well. And in the heat of the day, he goes and he sits down on the well with no bucket, no means of helping himself, and sits there waiting for his friends to go and get food. And then the Bible says that a Samaritan woman comes to draw water, and Jesus asks, "Will you give me a drink?" And what's really interesting for those of us who know the kind of background, in the heat of the day, women would be expected to either, well, not to be there, they'd be at home in the heat of the day, but they'd also, if they were out and about, they'd be expected to be in groups. And so this woman, Fontaine, was either kind of up to no good, maybe like searching for a man that she could kind of connect with in a maybe less than wholesome way. And Jesus would be expected to back off or to kind of walk away. But what's really interesting is she comes forward and he stands his ground. And not only that, but he says, will you give me a drink? And he was asking that because in those days, they would need to take their own bucket to the well, and Jesus had no bucket. So he's sitting there full of authority. He decides to stand his ground as someone with capacity for meaningful action, but also full of vulnerability. It's hot. He's genuinely thirsty, and he's asking this woman for help. And then they have this conversation that we haven't really got time to go into, but where Jesus says, and tells Fontaine some things about her life. You know, he says, go and tell your husband. And she says, well, I haven't got a husband. And he said, no, you're right. You've got like a handful. Right. And so he tells her all these things about her life. And he empowers her to go back to her community, a community down the road, like wherever it is, and to tell people about this encounter that she's had with him, and that living water flows from within her. And what I love about this is that Jesus is full of authority. He's also taking proper risks, meaningful risk, in an unclean territory, speaking to what would have been seen as an unclean woman. And he knows who he is, and he loves her enough to take that risk. And then he calls her to go and stand in her authority and her risk taking too. And I think Jesus does that all the way through the Gospels, and I just love it.
That's such a good example, Joy. It's such a good example because it's not just about Jesus and his authority, it's in his vulnerability and calling her forward into her destiny and outside of the context and culture kind of dynamics of what would be expected of women too. Yeah. And if she was probably, I think, as we can tell from the context of the story and what Jesus references to her husband or the handful of them, she is not in a place of security. As a woman in that time, if she wasn't in a monogamous marriage, she was not in a place of financial security. So if she was up to no good in any kind of way, it might have been because she wasn't being looked after well by the community that ultimately God kind of commissioned them to live by. But way back when they entered the promised land, he lived and commissioned them to look after each other, and especially the vulnerable, the widows and the orphans, and ultimately women, because they didn't have the ability to look after themselves. So there's so much at play if we look at the context, and I think it's a really, really good example. And we want to consider that in light of where we are at personally, where are we at in the quadrants, and we want to consider then how we are helping those around us here, right where we are locally in our churches, near, a little bit further afield and far across the world globally. And within that context and thinking about the women that we serve through World Vision, I'm trying to skip on. There we go. We need to speak up on behalf of them, like Jesus did for this for Fontaine. And I love that you know her name. I love it. And this quote is something that summarizes what we do. I raise up my voice, not so I can shout, but so that those without a voice can be heard. We cannot succeed when half of us are held back.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we would love to see the end of poverty in our lifetime, and we have seen a dent in it. Way back when Livy had happened, like the gradient of the progression of the end of poverty has shifted. I wish I could show you the graph, and I must share that with you, Joy. But it has shifted. We were nearly like eradicating it, then COVID hit, and there's been other things happening in the world that we've gone back up in that gradient. But it means it is possible. But it has to end, and it begins ultimately with women across the world. Every minute, just read these out, every minute 22 girls under the age of 18 are married. That is 12 million girls a year under the age of 18 are taken into child marriages, which is horrific. Every day, women and girls spend 200 million hours collecting water, which is keeping them from their education, development, and other ways. And today, 130 million girls aged 6 to 17 are out of school. And we know that that's going to impact their future in so many ways. And so the question is, how do we shift this? How do we change this? How do we help them come from that bottom quadrant of suffering? How do we empower them and help their lives change and go into the flourishing quadrant? Ultimately, throughout the work we do and the programs we run in World Vision, we do it through helping them in 5 areas of their lives. And that is through these 5 areas. So in education, we help girls stay in school and receive the quality education that they need and deserve by training teachers, providing all the materials they would need, helping also parents within that. We help with the mother and child health. We train community health workers who equip young mothers with information and support during pregnancy and the early years. We help with getting them access to water so they are not having to walk so many miles and spend so many hours a day collecting water for their communities, their families. If they have easy access to clean water, that is absolutely, it's a real sort of taken for granted thing in our lives, but this is a huge thing for young girls and women across the world in these countries where it is very difficult for them. And then there's child protection. We work to protect girls from a female genital mutilation and to empower and equip families with realistic alternatives to selling their children into child marriage. We could never imagine doing that to any of our children, but there are families that they are at such desperation points. They are experiencing poverty like we can't imagine. And I know that to think of that being your only option to sell your child into child marriage, we're just horrified by. But if 5 of your other children are going to starve and die and you could get some money by doing this, you know, survival mode kicks in. We have to try and understand. So we are always trying to equip families with alternatives. So this is not something they even have to consider. So our programs engage children, youth, parents and communities and faith leaders to address all these harmful practices. And then the last one is economic empowerment. We want to equip and empower women by increasing their knowledge through the education, but also giving them business and farming skills, financial literacy, leadership opportunities. Women can do so much. We know that, we believe that, and that's the case for these women living in these countries that are experiencing extreme poverty. So if we can step in and give them these opportunities, we know that lives will be changed, their lives will be changed, their families will be changed, their communities will be changed. When women are empowered, they become stronger, but everything around them becomes stronger and better. So I think at this point, Joy, I was going to just look at some case studies, unless you had something around that you wanted to sort of jump in about the quadrants a wee bit more or anything.
No, you go ahead. I think we could, as you're telling the stories of the case studies, maybe to invite listeners to think about where they end up in the quadrants, because we're only able to raise our voice, to raise others' voices, if we're reflective about what stops us. And so that would be the important thing for me, is recognizing, obviously we all hope to be in that top right hand corner, and we hear those statistics and those situations and think, I would love to be able to do something about that, but there's things that stop us, and it's really important that we recognize what they are so that we can get ourselves into a place of authority and vulnerability. But you go ahead with these case studies.
Yeah, I'm even thinking that about myself right now. So we might be able to finish on that kind of reflection, personal reflection. Yeah. So this is Anjura from India, and she, I've skipped on. No, yes, she was just 13 when she was told she was to be married. Within a year, she gave birth to her first child. So that's 14. Like my middle son is 14. I don't have any daughters, but this, yeah, it really gets to me. This ultimately was shattering her dreams and her future. She did want to become a teacher, so she thought this was all over. But then she encountered World Vision and joined one of our programs, and it ultimately changed her life. She said she attended all the programs conducted by World Vision in her community, and because she felt empowered, she gained knowledge and she moved on from more than what she thought her life would be. She was encouraged to study. She joined World Vision as a volunteer. She has now been training children on education and rights, especially young girls in her village. She then says many village girls were facing child marriage, so she joined the child protection unit formed by World Vision. Today, she is 23. She's a mom to 3 boys, like myself. She has prevented 5 child marriages and counseled over 20 families against it. So
Wow.
this shift can happen. It's so possible. And like, when you say 5 child marriages, it's not a big number, but this is only one little story and one little part of the world that we work in and serve in this community. But 5 child marriages is a phenomenal shift. Those 5 girls,
Amazing.
their futures have gone a totally different trajectory for what it could have been anyway, from what it could have been. And I'm just like blown away by it. So this is another one. We have Pauline from Kenya. And the quote from her is just phenomenal. Obstacles are temporary, but how you overcome them all depends on you. Your strength is within you. To hear a young woman from a place of such desperation and extreme poverty say that it's inspiring. It gets my blood rushing. She was brought up and trained to be a Takana wife, but she wanted more. She was ultimately from a nomadic family of 6 siblings. And she said that men were empowered with all the decision making, while the women were voiceless and obliged just to submit to any desire or will of the man. Girls were denied rights to education and subjected to cruel cultural practices in the name of training to be housewives. And she was determined not to follow. So she managed to study with the facilities and the programs offered to her through World Vision. She went on to complete a degree and she did a master's and is now doing a PhD research on flood risk management. Like,
wow.
Like how she went from here to here, like it's just
amazing,
absolutely phenomenal. And so through all that, I'm thinking through what holds me back, because as a woman, and where I live, I have not high levels of oppression in my life, but I do think there's still insecurities of what is expected of me, just negative connotations of speaking up and standing up and trying to tap into my strength without, I never want to diminish anyone else's value. And I think, yes, it's really good to be sensitive to that, and we need to be sensitive to that, but we also need to be confident, not in an arrogant way. It's the vulnerability, isn't it? It's be confident with our authority, but with vulnerability. And I definitely go into that withdrawal and safety quadrant, and I excuse it in the sense of I'm just not the right person for this, or it's not my place, or, you know, I do think there's still a voice in my head that says, well, I'm not a man. And I need to really push against that. And it's not for anyone, and any man in my life has really oppressed me. It's different things over our lives we have believed, and we have to break those core beliefs off and step into the calling and the destiny that God and Jesus has ordained for our lives. But I don't know where you're at with that, Joy, or if that has triggered any thoughts in your mind.
Yeah, I just am left feeling a sense that if we don't step out, we're in that. It's really easy to point a finger at global governments and say you're exploitative and sitting in injustice. But where are the times when I've not stepped up and I've just sat in my own authority without like stepping out? And that voice, I think I really resonate with what you're saying of sometimes you think, well, I'm not a man. It's like a voice of society that sometimes says, who do you think you are? And the biggest thing that we can do as women is to cheer each other on, and to cheer the men on as well around us, and and our children, so that we can encourage everyone to bring their God-given gifts and authority, and also step out and take risks to see change. And so that the win isn't that we're all just standing in authority. The win is that we're all being who we are, who we've been created to be. And I love that stuff from Pauline, where she's just made that huge change and is now doing a PhD. It's just incredible. She will now be someone who has really stepped into her authority, taking risks, and is taking other people with her. It's just wonderful to hear about.
It is phenomenal. It really is. And with the opportunities I've had in my life, I'm really humbled, because I haven't been held back half as much as she was at the beginning of her life. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
what am I doing with what I've been given, with the
Yeah.
strengths God has instilled in me, with the opportunities through education, the country I live in, the career I can have, or what am I doing with my voice and the time and everything? And so there's a deep challenge there, to step up into what I am made to be for the sake of others too. And that's the call on all of our lives, and following the path of Jesus and the example of Jesus. I think
Totally.
I have a little, I'm gonna share this last screen so that if anyone does want to find anything else more about what we do in our kind of initiative in World Vision around making a stronger world. Our program is called Strong Women, Strong World. QR code, the code there on your left. It is on my left, so hopefully it's on your left. And then we do have a great storybook. If you have any young girls in your lives, you can scan the QR code there for the storybook Girls Who Dare to Dream. And it's phenomenal stories about girls all across the world, and kind of like the case studies I've shared today, just telling of how they've gone from not having much and not many opportunities to just being propelled into a wonderful destiny of having a voice, and a future and a hope. So within all of that, I am so grateful that you've taken the time out to listen today and join Joy in that. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen because there we go. And I really, really appreciate it. It was just, let's touch base. Let's share what we've been talking about across all of these kind of struggles that we have personally, but then what does this mean for what we do with our lives for the sake of others in our local communities and across the world. Joy, have you any last comments, last thoughts before we go?
I think I just love this stuff, and just hearing those stories about women who have stepped into their full strength and power inspires me to do like more of the same as well. So I feel full up after this conversation, and I hope the people who have been listening do too.
I do too. I really do. I'm really inspired. And I think if you do scan that QR code, you can see many, many more of our stories of the impact on women's lives across the world.